So this is a manuscript by the composer Puccini, and it's an interesting one because everyone knew he was a great revisionist. He liked was never satisfied, he was always correcting his work, and here you can see he's written it. How are you? This is the opera that was never sung.
You were just saying to Mark that the power of the book.
How much is this worth?
Well, it comes with the first edition of the score. It's $16,500. Yeah, What I like about it is it's been scribbled in by some child, but looking at the way they were using the pen and the kinds of things they were drawing, I see they can find it. I think it was something around the time, so this was 1770. I like to think that I sort of made a little story about it in my head. I like to think that Dad was on business, his daughter was getting bored. When are we going, Dad? And he said, draw in here, please. Keep quiet. And there's this little, which I think looks rather like a turkey. I don't know what you think. And I wonder if this is her trying to write her name. Maybe she was called Betsy, but she couldn't quite get the letters right. There's no way to prove it. But then you turn the page, and I wonder if that's a portrait of the artist. So I like to think of a dad and his daughter on an outing together, and him going, just drawing this to keep quiet. Because I know I've done that with my little sisters. Just draw me a picture. 1770.
It's amazing how books can just take you back into time.
There's lots of things we'll never know about. It's all against injustice.
Yeah, that's bad.
Get to one.
Thank you so much.
It's on all the time. There was a show a week ago that I was on, which was the one with Bill Paxton narrating. And in that case are some of the great Kennedy relics. Where are you from?
I'm from Michigan.
And when's your project due, or you have to do it here?
We're just doing this for fun, actually.
Okay. You know what? I like an honest guy. That's all right. Well, I think it would make an interesting article. You were here in Boston. You're at the Antiquarian Book Fair, and you saw magnificent relics having to do with the 50-year anniversary of the death of John F. Kennedy. First hand, you helped. Mm-hmm. Want to hold his rosary beads?
Trust me with them.
They're worth $600,000.
That's what we heard, yeah.
Okay. So you can. I haven't let anybody else hold them.
Dude, you're special.
Wow.
you want me to
I want to
do
get
that?
that price tag.
If my mom knew I was touching these, she would tell me to go to church.
Let's see how I get it.
Yeah, I'll get you one too.
My mom would
Put it in your hand. I'm not going to take it out of here, but put that in your hand and get a good photo of it. And this, I consider this the most important relic that's in private hands relating to our martyred president. His rosary beads, our first Catholic president. And he carried these with him all the time, and he'd always go. These came from his best friend, Dave Powers.
Now, how did you come in contact
I
with
bought them from Dave Powers.
Wow.
Bought them from the Sun. And you get to hold them too. You were shaking a little bit. Saw that.
You can see where he's touched you.
Yeah.
How much money did you offer him in order for you to get these from him?
Oh, I can never tell you that.
Never saw it?
That's a trade secret.
Of course.
But a lot. Yeah. None of the other students will have done what you just did who are here. That I can assure you. Because I'm not letting anybody else.
Hello, what's your name today?
Hi, my name is Ava.
We see you purchased something. What you have?
I purchased a book, a play of the story Little Women by Louisa May Alcott.
And how often do you come to book fair?
This is the first time I heard of it, actually. So first time.
Are you from Boston?
Yes.
And do you like the book fair so far?
I do, yeah, very impressed with it.
What is your favorite piece of your collection?
Any book that sells. It's not a matter of the value of the book or the price of the book. It's really when you have a book that connects with a particular customer, that you see a customer really get excited about the book, and then you know that you may develop them as a client, as a customer. And the whole thing of book selling that makes it enjoyable, makes it a great profession, is matching books to customers, making sure the right people get the right books, people that are looking for particular books, that you can get the books that they want. So sometimes there's as much excitement in selling a $50 book to somebody who's really excited to get it as there is in selling a $25,000 book to somebody who's excited to get it. Sometimes that person buying the less expensive book is more excited to get that book than the jaded wealthy collector who buys the $25,000 book. So it's hard to say a particular author or a particular title or a particular book. It's always a matter of how well you've matched the book to the customer, to the person who's buying the book.
What would you say is your most prized possession? And do you mind showing us?
The best book I have in inventory right now,
I'm so sorry.
the outstanding collection that I have right now is a complete collection of Henry David Thoreau. And it's $350,000, but it has the finest known copy of Walden in pristine condition, not a flaw, not a speck, looks like it just came off the press. Has an original manuscript from Walden, and it has the poem O Baker Farm, which is an important passage on Walden, and it has the passage about the Irish fisherman who's sitting in the boat and he's not catching any fish, so he moves to the other end of the boat and tries, and he doesn't have any better luck there. And Thoreau writes up a hilarious account of the Irish fisherman who doesn't understand why moving to the other end of the boat didn't help. Thoreau's aunt, who read Walden in manuscript, have her copy of Thoreau's first book, Week on the Concord Merrimack, with her disapproving annotations in it, calling it a blasphemy and describing other things. And some relative, before they sold the book from the family, erased some of her notes, but you can still read through the erasures. They didn't erase the places where she wrote good in the margin. They only erased the places where she wrote sorry or blasphemy or poor poet or something like that. And the other these are just samples from the collection. The other thing in the collection is the proof sheets for the essay on civil disobedience. which is a great essay. And it was first published in Aesthetic Papers, a little journal, published in 1849. And these are unbound sheets of that journal, so it's a very rare form. But those are the teasers. Those are the little high spots from the collection. There's also a brick from a home that Thoreau helped build. There's a Thoreau pencil. He was in the pencil business. There's some pages of manuscript, association copies of books from his library, books that belonged to his friends, 2 books from his library that he owned himself. So the collection has everything a collector would want. It has autographs, photographs, pristine copies of the books, association copies of the books, presentation copies of some of the books, and other rare material. It's probably the best collection around. The other things I have are nice. First separate printing of Poe's The Raven.
That doesn't happen
And
in libraries.
it's just
Yes,
a separate
I suppose
printing.
eventually. But
The first edition of the book was published in 1845, but it was in a green cloth binding like his Tales, which I also have here. But the first separate edition, where they published the poem all by itself, was published in this format, and that was a premium that was given away to subscribers to a magazine published by a man named Demorest, Demorest. And any kids that would go out and sign up subscribers to his magazine could win a copy of The Raven or their choice of a couple of other books. And smart kids took The Raven. And it's very rare. It comes in cloth and in wrappers. Cloth binding is the more expensive, but it's also the more common now. The wrapper copy is very rare. There's just a handful of them known, and that may be the best copy known. It's in pristine condition. Most of them have a little chipping and wear on the spine. The spine on that copy is just perfect from end to end, and that's important to collectors. The condition of your books is really key.
Now, what does that go for?
Well, that one right there is priced $22,500. Next to it is Emerson's 5-Acre Capital Oration, which is the great essay that he wrote called The American Scholar, is the nickname for it, where he's urging American readers to turn to American literature and pay attention to their native literature as much as they pay attention to English and European literature, because he's saying Americans have something to say, they have something to write, and he's urging people to do that, and that's the oration where he talked about that. There's a book inscribed by Emerson to one of his friends. It's an anthology of Greek authors. There's a first issue of Tom Sawyer in the publisher's full leather binding, which was the most expensive binding. And there's a copy of Huckleberry Finn, likewise, first printing in the publisher's deluxe binding. So those are some highlights.
What about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde?
Well, that's the first American edition of wrappers. What makes that copy really nice is that it belonged to Sarah Orange, and she's a regional author, well known here in England, maybe not as well known and followed in other parts of the country. But Sarah Orange was a very well-read woman, but she wrote mostly about local and regional matters. And she wrote mostly kind of conventional literature, conventional stories. Jekyll and Hyde is way outside the box.
Say is your most prized possession of all?
Our most prized possession that we have with us?
Yeah.
That's tricky. That's a tough question. I'm very fond of this piece, which I don't know if you're getting, but this is an example of one of the most visually decorative Ptolemaic world maps that was produced in the beginning of the 16th century. This forms the foundation for really all cartography for the first half of the 16th century. That said, it's basically 2nd century geography, because Ptolemy's work from the 2nd century AD was lost during the Middle Ages, and then during the course of the 15th century it was rediscovered and allowed geographers and other humanists to reconstruct a visual image of the world as they knew it.
Now, how about your favorite piece here?
My favorite piece here? Mine. well. Pardon me. It's this. This is a book called Cosmography. It was published by Sebastian Munster. This one's from 1552. And for a good half of a century, this was the way that most literate Europeans would find out about anywhere that wasn't home. And it's got a beautiful binding with a cardinal's crest. So this is something that was made for someone who's very important in the church. And the book itself is essentially one of the first encyclopedias, one of the first descriptions of the known world. And because it's important for doing that, it's got a lot of maps. And it has some of the first maps based on information that doesn't come from Ptolemy. Some of the first maps of Europe that show modern information. So, for instance, you have one of the first maps of the world to show that the Straits of Magellan exist. This is the first world map to name the Pacific. It's one of the first maps that really reflects the ability to sail around the world. So that's important. For context, it also has the Ptolemaic world map, which really only shows you what the Romans knew about.
Well, I have only two.
You have a map of Europe, which will look funny to you because it's oriented to the south. But that's deliberate, because most of the modern maps that it's based on, maps of Germany, maps of Bohemia, all the most up-to-date ones were surveyed using a solar compass. And if you're using a solar compass, which is at its most simple is a stick in the ground,
Particularly if this format is
that will orient you to the south, because if you're trying to orient yourself to the north with it, it won't work because you'll be standing in your light, because the sun will be to your south. So all of these most modern maps are all oriented to the south, so the rest of what you build on it will also be oriented that way. So this isn't a mistake.
It's on purpose.
It's deliberate, and it's a statement of modernity. It's saying this is not Ptolemy's Europe map. This is modern, this is new, this is 16th century. Now, not all of his maps were southern oriented. This one oriented to the north of Spain, but again, its sources were still basically Ptolemaic. France.
How much does a book like this go for?
This is 75,000.
How old is it?
This was printed in 1552. And the binding is contemporary to that. So.
You don't want to buy it.
But yeah,
That's well, I wouldn't say cool,
Munster's fine.
but I think it's
Introduce yourself to the camera.
I can't hear quite.
Can you introduce yourself to the camera?
Good afternoon. My name is Vincenzo Ferro, and I am an owner of a bookshop in Italy.
What would you say your most prized possession is?
Most prized here.
Yeah.
If you want to see it.
Yes.
Actually, we have a lot of quite valuable stuff. But if I have to address just one item, I would suggest you. This manuscript.
I know, I'd be drinking a lot more sandwich.
On the bottom too. Now, what's so special about
This is quite interesting because we are talking about a manuscript. So I mean handwritten books. It is written on vellum, not on paper, and it is dated 1354. So we're talking about a manuscript of the 14th century. It is complete, perfectly preserved. So it is valuable for the age, very ancient, and it is mostly important because of the content. Because we are talking about a manuscript regarding the art of memory. That was a text. It is called Doctrinale of Alexandre. It was used to teach children how to learn Latin, using some tricks, memory tricks. So they teach children in rhymes, using jokes. So it was easier for them to teach Latin. And the other interesting things about this manuscript is that in that time vellum was very expensive. So they tend to reuse ancient manuscript to write again. So what do? They took an old manuscript, so older than 1754. It was a long manuscript, clean with a knife, all the written text. They reused that. We have been able, using a black light lamp, to find some works of the previous manuscript. And so this is very nice because it is important for the age, important for the content, and important because you can see on the back of the volume the older manuscript. And this is priced $95,000.
Like your favorite out of this
It's
collection?
very difficult to say. There are at least a couple of books I like most. And it is funny because they have different prices. For example, one of the items I like most is this one. It is quite cheap, I would say, cheap comparing to that kind of manuscript. Of course, it's an expensive one. We are talking about $6,000. And it is quite important because it is a manuscript written by a scholar in the 18th century. And it is a physics manuscript while he collected all the lessons at university. And it is illustrated in a wonderful way. You see that kind of sfera armillare. It seems to be printed. You see the details, and this is all handwritten. Interesting things, these books, this manuscript has never been printed. So it is kind of unique copy. And another books I like the most, I would say, this is great, but I would show you a printed one. This is quite interesting. $12,000. This is very, very nice. We're talking about Dante Alighieri. But this is not a Divina Commedia. We have many Divina Commedia. This is very important for the Italian languages because this is the first edition of the De Volgare Eloquenza di Dante. This is a treatise in which Dante speculates about the Italian and the use of the Italians in literature. Interesting things, this has been written by Dante in Latin, but the first time this has been written, it has been written in Italian. You see, this is in perfect condition. And this is a milestone in the history of the Italian language. That is why I like it. I like it more. And another thing I would like to show you, because here we are talking about the history of the printing. This is very interesting. This is a book printed in 15,000. The printer of this book, I would say, this is the most important and most famous printer the history of printer ever had. We are talking about Aldo Manuzio from Venice. His most famous printer introduces so many innovative things in the art of printing. This book is very interesting in why. This is a religious book, a letter from Santa Caterina. It's important for this reason. Before this book, all the books were printed in this kind of type, or in Gothic type, like that one. Aldo Manuzio, he understood that it was time to try to discover a new font that would have made possible to print character in a smaller size. You have to imagine that before this book, all the books had this size, so it was impossible to read standing. If you wanted to read a book, you had to be seated on a chair. So Aldo had this idea, and he asked Grifio, was one of his partners, to engrave a character different from that. This was a character. You see, this is italic, what we call now italic. So these 4 words, Gesù dolce, Gesù amore, Gesù, was the first attempt to print a book in italic. Aldo tried this, he saw that it worked, and then from the next year he started to print books no more with this character, but using this character, the italic, and which was the innovation, that from this book on it was possible to print book in this format. That means that from this book, from these 4 words on, you could read a book walking. You could bring a book with you. So just these 4 letters completely changed the history of the printing. That is amazing. Just a few words on a printed book can change.
Those are the first italics ever.
That's correct.
Printed in that image.
That's
Yes.
correct. That's
We just heard a lecture.
And it was amazing for that, you know. And for example,
And then it
this-
took a long time to develop the italic.
yes, that's correct.
Because then there are ligatures, and then there are more ligatures, and so on.
And this is amazing because I use this character to demonstrate, as an example, how a book can really change the history of the world. Some books are Mason, and the history of the world changed. These 4 characters in a book are Mason, around which the history of the world changed. So that's amazing.
Yes.
We could have so many other histories about books, but you know. Take the question.
Think like that was.
How did this just happen? I have an alter ego called Dolly as my secretary. Shall I do it now?
You can. I don't care.
What do you want
What's the
to...
interview?
I don't know, what are you talking about?
So can you introduce yourself to the camera?
No! You ask me questions.
What's your name today?
I have no idea.
What's your
My name today is Adam.
Your whole collection, what's your most prized possession?
I don't have a collection of books, strangely. We have stock. It's not my collection. It's a common fantasy, it's the idea that this is a collection. And often people are very well meaning and always say, you have a beautiful collection. And it's one of the things that booksellers are hackles go on, because actually it's just inventory. Which brings you on to another thing, is to whether you collect books or not. I have like 2,000 books at home, but I'm not a collector. Collectors are one thing. It's an on-off switch, you're either a collector or not. So thank you, it's very kind. Again, what's your most prized book or whatever? It doesn't really work like that, but I mean, there are books that I have that give me a frisson when I see them and buy them. That's one, which is Beckett's More Pricks and Kicks. They only did 750 copies of it. It's a very substantial work. It was a complete disaster. It is known in perhaps 5 copies of industrial in the world. And that's released.
Now, how about your most favorite piece?
What do you mean? In terms of writing or in terms of book?
And if there was one thing you could take home with you today, what would that be?
It's an interesting. I don't think like that. I don't need to take the books home. There was a fantastic bookseller called Peter Howard who had a shop called Serendipity Books. He was, as anyone will tell you, a cantankerous monster. And he was, I loved the man. He was fantastic. He died about 3 years ago. And he said that no book seller can be a book collector. because every book you take home you deprive one of your clients of. That's the typical pompous and po-faced sort of thing to say. But actually, there's a truth about it. What's happening behind you as you take this, by the way, is much more interesting than what's happening here. But nonetheless, we can plough on. Anyway, so no, I don't collect books. I don't take books anymore. It's enough to have the books. That's the key. And I've got books that... I've got books in stock that I just give me a joy. Beckett's a big hero of mine. We have a copy of Murph. It makes me smile every time I see it. It's the second best copy in the world. And it's just an amazing thing. It makes me happy.
If there was one piece in your stock that you would want to show the world, which would that be?
Now that's a good question. That is a good question. And I don't know the answer to it. Let me think about that toward the end. Again, that's a fantastic question. Here's a question. Come on, this question. If there was one book you want to show the world in stock, what would it be? You can't write. And interestingly, I can't read. It's a good question. I can't think of I think you drew yourself. This is Paul Foster. He's also a bookseller. That's fascinating. I mean, there have been books that I actually just... and there's one that's crossing my mind. I can't...
They want to shut it off.
They can shut it off whenever they want, darling. I can't remember. I genuinely can't remember. There is a book that is just so breathtaking. I can't remember what the damn thing is. Inevitably, the best books, once you go past stages of books that you like, you go past being excited about books that just in fine condition, and inevitably the books that you actually end up adoring are books that are association items. So a book inscribed from one person to another. We've just had, we have just sold a copy of a book by Leslie Stephen. And Leslie Stephen's daughter was Virginia Woolf, who had a sister called Vanessa Bell. On the death of Leslie Stephen, who was himself a novelist, writer, he was a critic, Virginia took it upon herself to gather together copies of his books and send them to friends as a kind of way of obviating grief. We had a book, which was his, 5 days after the death of the father, inscribed to the sister by Virginia. It's the earliest inscribed Virginia Woolf item we've ever got. And there's something so kind of perfect about that triangle. The fact that she should send out her dead father's words, printed words, to her artist's sister as a kind of literary act of grief and mourning. And that was very moving and kind of very touching. Annoyingly, there's something in the back of my mind, there's a book we had a few years ago, which was kind of a perfect example of that moment. But I can't for the life of me remember this because I'm very old and my memory is gone. So that's